Hello, everyone. So I am about to begin an interview with Terrence Deacon. He's currently professor of anthropology and member of the cognitive science faculty at the University of California, Berkeley. He is the author of The Symbolic Species, the Coevolution of Language and the Brain. And in order to celebrate the 25 years anniversary since the publication, we are about to begin a conversation with him. So welcome, Professor. The title, The Symbolic Species, the Coevolution of Language and the Brain. Considering that the brain is not a prerogative of humans alone, we can assume that what makes us the symbolic species is verbal language. Can you please explain to us in what sense and what is the meaning of the term coevolution?
So what's unique about the approach I took back in 1997 is the recognition that our ability to communicate and the unusual way we communicate with language played a role itself in restructuring the brain to make it easier to do so over time. So that both language changed and our neurological system changed in order to respond to the special and unique demands of language. So that coevolution basically says that language evolved, changed over historical time and prehistorical time, and that at the same time, brains track that change. It's not a symmetric process because language can change much more rapidly than brains can, but over the course of, I think, close to 2 million years, the ability to communicate symbolically, not just in spoken speech, but in all of the ways we communicate symbolically, including ritualistic communication, signed communication, and so on. All of those things put special demands on brains so that those who evolved with brains that were better capable of doing this had more offspring and produced this capacity so that both capacities increased simultaneously.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So your reflection on the relationship between brain and language fits within evolutionary theory, interweaving biological, neurological, philosophical, and cultural aspects. Is a hierarchy among these disciplines possible?
They're related, obviously. And the key is, of course, that biology is the bottom line. Biology lets us know what can and can't happen. Evolution is about how that changes over time. It turns out that, of course, there is constant interaction between these, but biology is slow to change. Biology is glacial. It's much, much slower than the kind of things that go on socially. And as a result, lots of changes can happen at the social level, even at the cognitive level, at the cultural level, that have basically minimal effects on the biology. The biology is just very, very slow to change. But if there's long enough time, although there may be lots and lots of social changes that go in one direction, reverse direction, go back again, and so on, there will be a cumulative effect, and that cumulative effect will eventually show up biologically. And that's the approach that I've taken in the book. And what that tells you is that, yes, these are all related. They all play a role, but there's a hierarchy in terms of the constraints. That is, some things are more constrained to change than others. And that will sort of determine what changes in both directions. It's also the case that language can't be too radically different than the way brains work. So that brains will constrain the way language is functioning. And of course, language then selects on different neurological capacities. Those who are better at certain things, just simply because of the luck of the nervous system they've received, will in effect do better and pass that capacity on. So the two will interact, but again, it's very asymmetrical.
So in the preface of to the first edition, 1997, you write, one of the purposes of the volume is to prompt the reader to question many touchy assumptions of various contemporary theories. 25 years later, can we assume that this has also happened to you respect to the assumptions formulated in your book?
So two things. There are a number of aspects of the approach that have not changed much, but in 25 years, significant changes have happened at the level of what we know about the nervous system, what we know about genetics, and what we know about evolution. And I would say that Although the core idea in the book, which has to do with what's unique about symbolic communication, and by this I don't just mean language communication, but this is what we would call a semiotic approach to evolution. There has not been a lot of development. I think that it's one area that still has a lot of work to be done in, and that is the study of the semiotics. What's different about language is not just that it's spoken, it's not just that it's arbitrary in the sound meaning relationship, but in fact that it's structured into the terms of the way it refers to things in a very different way than, say, gestures, facial gestures, or shrieks of pain and so on, all of which communicate, but they don't communicate the way language does. That part of my story, I think, has not changed much. That is why I called the book The Symbolic Species. And my point here was not just that it's the language species. It has to do with a different way of referring to the world. That's not changed much. Nor has the idea of coevolution in my thinking changed much. Clearly, these areas have to interact in complicated ways. So those things have stayed the same, but understanding how the brain works and how it's changed and how language is distributed in the brain, how its evolution has taken place, how evolution itself works. All of those things, I think we've begun to come up with new questions and new approaches since then. And so in many respects, I would say that the main theme of the book is the same, that I would not have changed a thing in that respect. However, the details of which genes are important, and what part of the nervous system is important and how the nervous system changed, those things have altered a little bit. Not radically, but to some extent. I am disappointed that in many respects, the field has not caught on to the semiotic problem. The field is still interested in just sort of an idea of general intelligence, like having a bigger brain just makes you smarter and that's all that you need. This is actually a much more radical approach. And I think it's one of the reasons why my book still stands out as an unusual approach to this problem, because it approaches it not in terms of something general like how big brains are or how smart we are, or just how much more communication we do. It's not just more communication. It's a radically different kind of communication. And that's really the core of what I was after. If I was to rewrite the book now, of course, there'd be a difference in the neurology that I'd talk about, a difference in the genetic I'd talk about, and even a difference in how we think about evolution. In the story about evolution in that book is built upon an idea called the Baldwin effect. I have radically rethought how that works. I've radically rethought the genetics of this problem since then. And I've radically rethought something that I critique in the book, which is the universality of grammar. I think that there are universals of grammar. I'm still convinced that they have nothing to do with biology. I think they're more like the universality that we see, for example, in mathematics. We invent new ways of doing mathematics, but we mostly say, no, we discover these things. Although we invent new ways of laying it out and marking it, we in fact say we've discovered something about mathematics. I think that we've discovered over the course of evolution constraints that make language possible. I think they've been discovered. They have not been invented and they've not been built into the brain.
So in your book, you make constant references to the implications of environment and, of course, adaptation to environments in the coevolution of brain and language. So today we live the experience of new, dematerialized, and virtual environments. How do you think this may affect the future fate of the symbolic species and the Homo sapiens?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, one of the things that I think I didn't pay as much attention to then, and I've become much more interested in now, is how languages allows us to get inside of each other's thoughts. So that right now, as we're interacting, we're thinking about what each other is thinking. There's sort of been this story, we've called it theory of mind. I think that's an oversimplification of the problem. Language itself has made it possible for us to communicate thoughts, wishes, desires, past experiences, emotional states that we couldn't have communicated otherwise. If two chimpanzees meet for the first time, they can communicate about their immediate emotional state, whether they're hungry, whether they're hurt, whether they're threatened, but they can't ask the question, so what happened to you last week? Where do you come from? What was your childhood like? What do you desire about your life? These are things that, because symbolic communication is somewhat detached from the immediacy of experience. We can now refer to things that are not here and now. And for that reason, we can refer to things that we've thought. So we are living in a world in which we're, in some sense, mentally interpenetrated with each other. We spend a lot of time thinking about each other's thoughts and about each other's wishes, and about our own possible future, which doesn't exist yet. I doubt that very few animals are in that situation. But the problem there is that it says that we are now in a context in which the medium of communication has played a significant role in how we interact with each other, in how our very personality and structure is built. So, for example, we have stories about our life. There are probably no other species that have stories about their life because a story is symbolic. What that means, though, as we change our modes of communication, we change to a much more virtual form of communication in which we can very much more elaborately and quickly exchange information with people that are somewhat at a distance from us. We can communicate to hundreds or thousands of people at a moment. We can communicate to people across the world, as you and I are currently. That's a change in the medium of communication. I think we have always been what the philosopher, not a philosopher, but he's a theologian, scientist, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, called a noosphere. The noos, of course, means thought. And the biosphere is, of course, the sphere of all biological organisms on the earth. The noosphere is this sphere of thought that we're engaged in, that no other species is engaged in. So that I am influenced by what Descartes said, what Aristotle said, what future researchers will think. Those are affecting my thoughts today. We're linked in a way that no other species is linked mentally. But that means as we change the mediums that we use to link these thoughts, it's going to change how we think. And in particular, we're so gullible that it's easy to recognize that artificial intelligence seems like it might be another being, that there might be somebody there, even though it's just a machine. We're talking about things that are just machines, but they're so good at emulating what we do. They're not doing what we do, but they're emulating it by taking in millions and millions of data points and making predictions off of those. We're so gullible that we find them to be like other people. But now here's the problem. The problem is that if we begin to treat artificial intelligence like other people, we also will begin to treat other people like artificial intelligence. And our noosphere is going to be contaminated by this mechanical-like thought that's going on. And that's going to influence our thoughts. And it's going to influence our future. I don't know whether it's the best influence, but I think it's going to have the kind of major change on the way people think and experience themselves and experience this relationship, this what we sometimes call intersubjective relationship. I think it's going to change how we have that experience. And I'm not sure it's going to be in a helpful direction.
Yeah, well, that's pretty scary because I think that's something, it's already happening. I mean, I can make a lot of examples where the new technology, like WhatsApp, I'm sure you will use WhatsApp or Telegram, of course. Sometimes it happens to me that I have discussion over these things, and it's scary because I am like, what is the tone of my friend? Is she mad? Is she sad? I just can't get it. I don't understand her, and that's scary because it seems like slowly I'm getting used to discuss on this chat. So I wanted to ask you, since you said this, you brought up these wonderful points. Do you think we are already developing a new symbolic language through technologies?
So interestingly enough, we do use symbolic communication online, but notice how it is significantly reduced and compressed. And it's one of the reasons we don't often know what's really in the mind of somebody else. And so what we do is, of course, we project, we imagine, and oftentimes those projections are not quite right. And the things that we communicate, because they're so compressed, don't give enough context. As a result, we're beginning to make these sort of quick judgments, shooting from the hip, so to speak, as they call it, that is, in which we are making guesses that are probably wrong. And the problem with this new technology is it can amplify those kinds of biases very, very fast and in very large ways. And of course, what we're seeing is that this technology has not so much brought us closer together, but in many respects has driven small groups apart. It's made differences show up as a much larger factor than they actually are, so that we tend not to see the overlap as easy as we see the differences. And I think what we see politically around the world is that this sort of divisive capacity has grown very rapidly. Now, part of this is because a lot of these systems work by virtue of the economics of screen time. That is, the more time that they can keep you on their screen, in their system, the more money they make. And so therefore, any bias that's built in that keeps you in their system is an economic advantage. The problem is, by virtue of human nature, we're much more worried and driven by the negative. Things that we're afraid of, things that we're worried, things that we're angry about. They keep us focused in ways that, oh, we agree. If we agree about something, well, we just sort of let it go. It's okay, we agree, we don't have to worry about it. We spend most of our time dealing with the differences. What this has done is it's made those differences. That is, the noosphere is not bringing us closer together as much as it's creating all of these little differences, fragmenting people into smaller groups that disagree about things. And it's the disagreements that now stand out. And as that explodes, of course, it breaks things up, breaks up political groups, it breaks up families even, and it certainly breaks up nations.
Yeah. Well, it happens to me, and for sure to other of my friends, that sometimes, something that you say during this discussion over chat can just, destroy an entire friendship, because you don't have the other person in front of you. You can't touch them. You can't see their expressions, which is like basically the most important, thing when you talk to someone. The physical touch also it's important, and so it's really difficult because these technologies are so present right now in our life. And I think that my generation, I am 29 years old. I was born in 1993. It's the middle one. Okay, I am in the middle because I am between a boomer, like I don't know, my parents maybe, that they didn't have this kind of stuff, this kind of things, and the teenagers who are wild because they know more technology stuff than I do, than my generation do. And the most important thing, they know how to exploit them economically.
Yes.
You for sure have already heard about TikTokers, content creators. So
Right.
it's really addictive. It's a drug, because you know that your cell phone knows more about you than maybe your mother or your father, because you just don't have to look up for something like, oh, this is a nice jumper. I love this gray jumper. And bam, you have a list,
Yes, right.
right? A list of like 10 different shades of gray of that jumper, because they know. That's scary. That's so scary. When I had to prepare myself for this interview, I won't lie to you, I had a huge help from my mother. She is a teacher in high school, and she helped me with these questions. And the last one was the one she was more fond of it, because she is so worried about kids nowadays. Okay, because they have this little devil machine that they talk to, but you're not talking to anyone. You're talking to plastic.
Yes, that's right. So, and of course, everything is so compressed.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes out of all of this, and this is for me maybe as troubling as anything else, and that has to do with the fact that in this process, we ourselves begin to become controlled by this.
Yeah,
I
sure.
like to describe, so in the 1960s and so on, this psychological field called behaviorism was huge. It was replaced very quickly by cognitive science, but behaviorism is still used in all sorts of ways in which rewards and punishments drive and control our behavior. The thing about good rewards and punishments is it's best if they're not obvious, if they're subtle, but if they're very consistent. Now, the issue is that when you and I are interacting with each other, there are rewards and punishments in terms of what we bring out in each other and what we don't like about each other, the little things that sort of get into that. If someone's trying to control somebody else's behavior, they control it by rewarding and punishing.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that now what we've done is we've built this into these automatic systems, recommender systems, and so on. And what that does is that it creates the kind of, I would say, perfect behaviorist trainer, but it's an electronic one. It's a machine. And what it's doing, because it can hold billions of data points, certainly thousands for each person, and all of them can play a role in subtly punishing or rewarding certain behaviors. It's the perfect behaviorist. So if we want a world in which machines can actually behaviorally organize and shape the thinking and behaving of people, machines are the best way to do it. They are perfect behaviorists, and we are the perfect subjects because we have a limited capacity to notice it, because the rewards and punishments can be so subtle, so subtly attractive. They don't have to work moment to moment like a serious pain or serious reward, but very subtle pains and rewards, repeated thousands and thousands of times in a subtle way. We can be easily controlled. My fear is that that's the future, and particularly of societies where there are an elite that's in significant control. Under those circumstances, we are going to be easy mice in this giant Skinner box that we call artificial intelligence.
Easy manipulated. So, last question. What do you think the new generation should do in order to avoid to, develop this new, not so good symbolic language? I mean, I see a huge difference between my friends, and for example, my little cousin. She's 19 years old, so she is part of this new generation. She lives with her phone, and so all their friends, they are all the same, and I don't think they are accountable, of course, for this. I mean, they just grew up in this situation, in this context. So what do you think I should do, for example, to help my cousin, to help her, to widen her horizon a little bit?
So I do think one of the things to do is to help people understand how they can be manipulated.
Yeah.
What is the source of this manipulation? And even if it seems attractive, that is, when you said you buy something because you thought it was nice, and you get a bunch of recommendations very quickly after that.
Yeah.
To recognize that is in a sense a manipulation, and even if it's attractive, even if it's a good manipulation, to resist it, to recognize that yes, it's attractive and it's interesting, or yes, I agree with something that somebody has said, and so I can say I'm going to like it or not like it, to avoid playing into that hand.
Okay.
Just simply to be conscious of what's happening is that, yes, it's attractive. Yes, it's repulsive. Yes, I want to join with this, or I don't want to join with that. every time that comes up, to just have this little sort of voice in your head that says, oh, it's trying to manipulate me. And yeah, just know that. That's a way to protect yourself. But the real problem is that we have to do this culturally. We have to expand this knowledge, help train people in understanding this, but then also find ways to curb that tendency in those who run these big systems, whether it's WeChat or in China, or whether it's a TikTok or any of these. So to get people to understand its manipulative capacity, and then just simply to resist it. There might be another way to do this, and that's that software developers could develop blockers that actually stop this from happening, or actually interfere with the information that is sent to somebody else. So, for example, I was asked to be a part of a software company that was developing a facial recognition system that would figure out when you're looking at the internet whether you're happy or sad or attracted or repulsed by something, and then to use that information as a recommender system, to use that information to sort of, you don't have to actively like something. It'll actually say, no, I'm going to say this is a like, or no, this is a dislike. I said I wouldn't join this organization unless one of their products was an app that you could put on your phone or your computer that would actually block that information, knowing exactly how it works, which is what they were trying to do, to set up facial recognition characteristics. So it looks at how your muscles are working in your face and your eyes and mouth and so on. To use that information to undermine the possibility for that information to be used. So that they would produce both at the same time. Both, you might say, both the toxin and the antitoxin at the same time. So that we could put that app on our phone so that we couldn't be used, so that we couldn't be taken up. I think that would be a wonderful gift that the software world could create for us, to sort of block these capacities. I think that could save us, because I don't think we're going to be able to do it at the government level. Government level is already controlled by this process.
Yeah, it is. The thing is, just like as in nature, it's like they're predators, so they're beautiful and you can't just stop watching them. So that's the difficulty. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me. It was such a pleasure, and I have to let my cousin see this. She talks English, so it won't be a problem.
Oh, good, good.
So thank you very much. I will stop the record so I can say hi to you properly. So
okay, I wanted to say just one last thing.
Sure.
Is that my other book, published in 2012, is also not by your publisher, sadly, but it's also in Italian. The book is called Incomplete Nature. I can't say the Italian translation of it, and nor do I know whether it's a good translation or not. But it's written roughly 10 years later.
Okay.
And over the course of a few years after that, but basically it sort of builds, I consider it a prequel to the symbolic species. By prequel, I mean a lot of questions were raised in the symbolic species. And what I wanted to say was, well, they forced me to rethink a number of assumptions about how the world works, about whether or not evolution has a purpose or not, about how evolution works, about how life came into the world from the first place. So there's a big chunk in the middle of it about the origins of life and about the nature of information. All of that is in this book, and it's now being followed up by another book that I'm about to publish that's called Falling Up. And the subtitle is Inverse Darwinism and Life's Complexity Ratchet. It's about how Darwin's theory is mostly a theory about competition, about negative relationships. The question is, evolution has also been about how things, of course, come together, get more complex, get more synergistic, work together. But we have not had a very good theory about how that works. So part of my response to the symbolic species and to this book, Incomplete Nature, the subtitle of that one is How Mind Emerged from Matter, is to actually talk about the process, how evolution is different than what we thought it was, more complex and more interesting. And of course, it's going to be relevant to the questions we just ended our discussion on. How is it that these new capacities change the course of evolution, and how they change human mental evolution and human symbolic evolution?
Perfect.